And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is here to help us live a toxin-free life. Dr. Aly Cohen is an environmental health expert who is triple board certified in rheumatology, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. Oh boy, my parents would be very proud of her. She's co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine and co-author of the best-selling consumer guidebook Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, published by Oxford University Press. Aly's releasing a new book next month that will connect the dots between everyday chemicals and the epidemic rise in immune disorders and autoimmune disease, and what we can all do about it. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aly Cohen.
Well, in case you haven't gotten the memo, toxic chemicals are my jam. I happen to really get into this conversation, and it didn't always start that way. It started off years ago with my dog getting sick, and I write about this in the foreword of Non-Toxic. And it actually evolved into a passion of sadness and of loss, and how he got sick at such a young age, a golden retriever. And it's since moved into this whole other world, which brings me here today to share with you a lot of good information that I think that you will hopefully take home with you and apply to your life. That being said, please have your phones out if you're going to take pictures, because I do have a lot of lists and things that I think are very usable. So, oh, here we go. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. So to begin with, this is a difficult conversation, right? This is a big topic. Toxic chemicals are all around us, and many of us don't even realize that. What's interesting in the United States is that we now have over 95,000 toxic chemicals in everything we love. The food we love, the clothing we wear, the cosmetics we purchase, often on TikTok, which is a mistake. We have a lot of chemicals that live in and around our bodies, on us, and of course feminine care products as well inside. What we need to think about is how are we going to take this problem, this pickle, and turn it into empowerment and really reduce the level of chemicals that we now find in our blood, in our urine, and even our breast milk. There are 95,000 chemicals, as I mentioned. There are about 15 new polymers that are patented every week. There's about 1,000 new industrial chemicals that are added to the market without testing required for toxicity, neurotoxicity, reproductive toxicity, and also demographics that are particularly vulnerable, which include not only pregnant women, young children, but also immune-compromised patients, like the kinds that I see, and the elderly. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we have this exposome, which is the totality of the chemicals that have kind of been in our lives since the day we are born till the day we die. But it really should also include where we are in utero and what exposures we have in utero, because these are really important issues, and we now have tons of data to show us that things like the placenta do not block all chemicals when they cross over into a fetus, and we'll get into that. But we have lots of things that determine whether or not we actually develop disease, right? It's not just chemicals, and people should understand that. It's a dance between lifestyle, exposures, and our genetic predisposition. Now, this was a really great Time magazine article in 2010, which really showed that we have these exposures that occur even when we're in utero that can affect not only the fetus itself and their risk for health conditions, but even transgenerational effects. We can affect the genetics of our bodies, and we can actually pass that on to successive generations. So when we think about exposures, we often think about ourselves, like I do as well, but we need to be also thinking about the pregnant world, the young people of the world that may have children if they so choose, and what that is going to matter in terms of exposures to chemicals, and how do we reduce those exposures now. Now, children happen to be uniquely vulnerable, just like pregnant women. And pound for pound, they actually have greater exposure just because of their size, and they're on the ground, they have hand-mouth behavior, but they also have very immature metabolism. So the mechanisms by which us adults can actually break down many chemicals through the liver, through some of our activities like sauna and exercise, kids don't actually have that ability, and they have more years of exposure to many of these chemicals. But there are also what we call vulnerable windows of susceptibility or vulnerable periods of development. And it doesn't just include prenatal exposure in young children. We really need to think about things like teenage years, like I do when I teach high school and college, and my own kids, I have 2 teenage boys, but also menopause as well. Because these are time periods when our hormones are quite excessive. We're building hormones, we're breaking them down, we know teenagers. But also, this is a place where many of the chemicals which act like hormones at very low levels, especially estrogenic chemicals, and mimic the hormones of our body can intervene and perhaps have greater risk of harm. Now, I'm a rheumatologist. I involved in complex immune cases, certainly allergies and things that have to do with us fighting the world, but also autoimmune diseases, our body fighting itself. It turns out that many of these chemicals that I'm talking about that are strongly tested and well studied for endocrine disruption or endocrine effects actually have immune system effects. And that book, thank you for mentioning, is actually next year. It's going to be coming out sort of in June, July. But I will be tying, sort of connecting the dots between these environmental exposures and immune system effects and what that means and how we can really manage those issues. Because we know that these chemicals, even at low levels, many of them, they cause low level of inflammation. And how much of that inflammation plays into some of our most worrisome chronic health conditions, especially metabolic conditions like obesity and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, this is sort of a chicken or the egg picture. And so the less we have in our body that kind of angers our immune system and we take those away, that really helps our body and lowers risk for disease. Okay, so what are we going to do about it, right? I wanted to get the why in there so that you could really hold on to the what. So when it comes to diet is something we can all wrap our heads around. We all think about our diet. Ashley did a great talk on nutrition. We need our nutrition, right? But what we really need to think about is how dirty is our food that we're currently eating? And whether it's just us or it's a national problem, we know it's a worldwide problem, really. But we consume a lot of processed chemicals. And these chemicals, once again, have been grandfathered in without much testing, usually under the headline of generally regarded as safe, but they are actually infiltrating the foods we eat, which affect our gut microbiome and get into our bodies, into our bloodstream. But it's not just the food macros. It's not just fats or carbs or organic or not. What I wanted people to think about is what is the transit of food from the second you pick it up at the store all the way through to when we eat it. We have to think about things like what we cook, of course, but how do we clean our food and our produce? How do we cook it? What kind of utensils, what kind of pots and pans do we use? How do we store our food? Because all of these components are touch points as to where we can intervene for those chemicals getting into the food that we eat and getting into our bodies. So yes, USDA organic is important, and I'm going to tell you why. We have basically no regulations on chemicals in this country. It's really upsetting if you really, really dig deep and see what's going on here. But USDA organic actually is one of the few regulations, especially in our food system, that actually has teeth, that has value, because it restricts thousands of pesticide chemicals, fertilizer chemicals, and genetically modified ingredients in the soil and in the foods that are packaged using these ingredients. So yes, I definitely encourage finding USDA organic whenever available, wherever it's accessible, wherever it's affordable. But guess what? We should all be able to afford it, because frozen USDA organics, for example, have all the nutrient value you can imagine, even better than fresh in many cases. So when you think about USDA organic in modern day, think about the big box stores. Well, on the East Coast, we have ShopRite, we have Stop and Shop, we have all these great big stores. They are now marketing their own USDA organic frozen produce. So consider buying that or telling your clients, your patients, your family that that's a really good way to hack the system, get cheaper food, just transfer it to glass and stainless steel so you don't cook those plastics. We can also use things like EWG's Dirty Dozen Clean 15. These are the lists that come out every year from this organization, which is not perfect, but it's very good. It's a good resource for non-organic produce. Non-organic produce meaning conventional. You can choose between the Dirty Dozen, which are the top 12 produce that's been tested annually, to see how much pesticide residue is found on the surface of that produce. And the Dirty Dozen have the most, the Clean 15 have the least. As you can notice, there's a lot of, on the Clean 15, skins, avocado, mango, things that have skins that are a little bit more protective, not perfect. But this is another resource that we can use to have cleaner food, because quality really matters to the human body when it comes to these chemicals. Now, another thing to think about is it's not just good enough to sort of remove chemicals from our lives, in my opinion, right? We can take away the air freshener, we can take away, toxic chemicals in our food, perhaps get a water filter, which we'll talk about. You can do a lot with cookware, that kind of thing. But what we should really know is that there are super studies showing that when you eat certain foods, they can actually combat the problems with the genetic effects from these chemicals. In other words, some of these chemicals like BPA, which is incredibly well studied, causes what's called DNA methylation, or changes to our genetics, our genome, in order to potentially cause harm and health risks. And what these nutrients have been shown to do is to offset that DNA methylation. So when you think about iodine, for instance, iodine is a critically undervalued nutrient that we should be getting every day to protect our thyroid, because there's lots of harmful toxic chemicals that like to hold on to our thyroid. You don't want to take too much, you don't want to take too little, but the idea is that we're not getting a lot of this stuff. And I would say we're very much undernourished as a society, given the fact that our food quality is very much questionable. Here's another great tool to decrease those chemicals and reduce risk for harm: cruciferous vegetables. These are like really detox powerhouses. And they are able to do a lot with our liver and increase the amount of breakdown of these chemicals. They have sulfur compounds, they are bioactives, and we all really can access many of these. So the idea is to add these into our lives, because they are a really great tool to handle the chemicals that we don't know we're exposed to, or that we also can't necessarily control. Now, food storage, this is from the 1950s, Tupperware. We have to think about our food storage. We don't have control over a lot, right? Single-serving plastics and those kind of things in the supermarket. But we can take things out of plastic and cook them and heat them in glass and stainless steel, and in materials that have a really strong matrix that don't leach into the food or the drinks that we carry. Now, the phthalates, which is a group of chemicals that we know have a lot of endocrine effects as well as immune system effects, are in lots of stuff, but they're also very much identifiable in vinyl, unfortunately in medical bags and tubing, which is hopefully going to be phased out eventually, but in perfumes. Anything with a perfume or fragrance on the label, yes, our favorite expensive perfumes that we buy and spend a lot of money on, they keep the scents lasting longer, the shelf life longer. So some of the things that are not food related, we want to get out of our lives too. We can choose better products, and there's plenty of resources to do so. And you see the triangle on the bottom? Food packaging has a triangle on the bottom. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed it. And these numbers we can utilize to make better, healthier choices. So you see the 3 for PVC. Here are the plastics resins codes that anyone can find on the internet. It was designed by the recycling community to save money, but we're going to use it to be healthier. And what we want to try to avoid is numbers 3, 6, and 7. So number 3 is vinyl, polyvinyl chloride. We have number 6, which is styrofoam or styrene, polystyrene, which is a carcinogen, very well-known carcinogen. And 7 is often BPA and bisphenols, which are similar chemicals to BPA, but they're disguised as being less harmful. So some of the sources of BPA, we know, many of you know that they're in the lining of canned foods, even organic canned foods, believe it or not. So not as easy to manage BPA in canned foods, so I often will tell people to go with frozen foods, frozen organics whenever possible, but receipts, BPA is used to seal the ink onto the top of the receipts. So there's lots of ways. You can have it emailed, you can take an envelope. There's lots of ways that we can talk to people about not getting exposed to BPA, even dermally. And again, the 7 on the triangle on the bottom is really useful when you're thinking about which products to use. Now, personal care products, again, we put this stuff in, on, and around our body, especially as women. In fact, adult women use about 12 products on average in a day. Teen girls, 17. I have teen boys, and I can tell you the cologne is insane. And I actually, I pick my battles, so, it's a pretty stinky house and not necessarily non-toxic, but I will tell you that we can intervene wherever it's appropriate and useful and think about the products that we use and at least have these products cleaned up. For instance, I teach high school and college, and I basically throw these products at the kids, and they download apps, and they look these products up and get safer choices. We know that puberty, as I mentioned earlier, is a vulnerable period of human development. We have lots of hormones circulating, a lot of being created, broken down. And we now know that earlier puberty is occurring over the last several decades, really you could argue over a century or two. And that's because we're getting these estrogen chemicals, these estrogen mimickers, exposure at much younger ages. So we're shifting puberty to younger ages, and not just women, it's in boys as well. So what do we do about it? And I have a little typo here. We want to choose products better. Many of you guys have heard of EWG, Environmental Working Group. Again, great resource, but it has Skin Deep at the end of that, ewg.org /Skin Deep. But we also have now apps like Clearia, Yuka, Healthy Living. Are they perfect? No, but they're very, very useful. And my 15-year-old actually got all of his friends to start using it to get their products, to get their stuff for the ladies, you know. So it's been traveling around the class, as far as I know. But the idea is that if my kids can do it, any kids can do it, and we should all be able to do this. It's actually very empowering. Now, when it comes to breast cancer and environment, you know, I put up here a hormone replacement with a question mark because we now have much more data, as we heard this morning from Dr. Malik. We do know a lot more about the hormone replacement therapies now. They're used differently, they're in different formulas, but they are a very personal choice given the patient individually. So that's something you really want to think about. But look at all these chemicals that are not only known but suspected risks for breast cancer. There are hundreds of them. And a lot of them come in to our bodies by way of our choices. And if we can take them out of our home, not buy them, they won't get into our bodies as much. We will control because we test for these levels. We know it's possible with behavioral change. This is my podcast, The Smart Human, and I interviewed Dr. William Goodson. And I'm running really late, so I'm going to keep running. But he did fine needle biopsies of women voluntarily and looked at their changes on their cellular level and then they came in again 28 days later to have a biopsy. 28 women did this voluntarily. It's a remarkable study. I hope people will listen to this. And showed that they not only had lower levels of these chemicals in their urine and blood from personal care products that they swapped out, but they had less markers, fewer markers and signals for breast cancer from the cellular tissue. This does not make the media. This does not make the media. These are incredible studies we should be hearing. Okay, air quality. Remove the stuff before you bring it in. Right? Try to avoid carpeting and carpet backings, incense. All of these, even essential oils, are often marketed as safer, which may likely not be the case. So we really want to think about air quality because we're in our homes, in our office so much. We can control our air. And some of the tips are really basic, you know, adding more plants, getting rid of the chemicals in the first place, dusting, using HVAC systems. This was my daycare for my kids about 10 years ago. Anything shocking about that? This is when I was just getting into this information. So we really want to think about how we reduce pesticides on our shoes, create a bucket outside of our home. Think about bug sprays that we keep around. I mean, I had like 15 bottles of bug sprays because we live in a farm in New Jersey, and it took me 5 years to figure out this stuff was around my house. So you just start to survey and think about what is in, on, and around your life. Now, drinking water is the number one thing I talk about. I have a 2-hour talk on it because it's that important and we don't think about it. Speaking of hydration, Ashley, I just want to let everyone know, never wear a full-body jumpsuit to a talk. I will tell you it took me 10 minutes to get in and out of the bathroom, and I will never do that again. Thank you. Anyway, our bodies are made up of water. If we do not get this right, it seems silly, right? We consume more water than any foods you will ever eat. So this has to be prioritized, and I hear about this never, nowhere. Now, this is an image from our book, Non-Toxic. It was so important to create this for people to understand where does our water come from when you have municipal tap, which serves 80% of our population, okay? 20% is usually wells. It comes from sewage. It comes from a whole bunch of places. These are many of the chemicals that go in and out the other side of these treatment plants because only 91 chemicals are actually covered and maintained and remediated under the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. Okay? Our water's really filthy. Okay, we have ways to clean our water at the point of use, which is in our homes. So there's a variety of ways to do it. They vary in terms of their efficacy. But I will tell you this is a priority we should be spending on, not so much even the testing, although we can test through TAP score, we can look at databases. These are great tools that I have students do. But we really need to be thinking about, instead of spending the money on testing, let's put money into the doing. Okay? And I really emphasize that in my practice and in my teaching. Testing, we know we're all filled with chemicals. We got to figure out how to get out of this mess. How you carry water matters. You want to avoid plastics. You really, really, really want to think about stainless steel, glass, and filling up at home. And 80% of the time, you are controlling your water quality. And there's a bunch of tips here that I think I covered, but essentially, again, create a water system for yourself. Be very comfortable with it, and try to do the best you can. I take it to dinner. I take a bottle of water to dinner that I fill up at home. It's not even weird anymore. You know what I mean? My kids deal with it. At least I think so. Sleep. We love sleep, right? Everyone needs sleep. I'm totally jet lagged. But I will tell you that sleep drives our metabolic clearance of many of these chemicals. So it really makes sense to look at this as sort of like a washout period at night. So the better your sleep, the more quality, the quantity, is a way of draining out some of the exposures that we don't have control over. So try to emphasize that. That's an integrative medicine approach, of course. Exercise, sauna, sweat, right? We want to sweat. We want to physiologically, anthropologically, we want to get rid of these chemicals. Remember, we've been around for 4.5 million years evolving, right? These chemicals have only been in the human experience for 75 years. 75 years. That's a lot of change for the human body to go through. That's why we're all getting sick. So we really need to think about this perspective. Supplements are great, but again, we want to supplement where it's appropriate. It's very personalized. Lots of things help us live healthier and with more nutrient value, means less risk for a whole host of health-related issues. But again, it's very personalized, and I will always, always, always emphasize that supplements that are junk will do nothing for you. And there's only a handful of high-quality supplement brands that I can name, and I won't name them here, though. But I will tell you that you can search them out, and there's ways to do that. They need to be third-party tested for quality, quantity, and so forth. Prebiotic, probiotics, again, our gut is a terrarium, an ecosystem. We want to clean up our gut. That is the entrance into the human body. That's where our immune system, its largest organ, is our gut. The better you do with the gut, the better you're going to do with your immune system and endocrine system function. These are my top 12 changes. There are hundreds of them, and I write about them. But I really want people to at least have some really high-yield, low-hanging fruit options as they move forward. Take-home messages, okay. We really know that these chemicals are everywhere. This is a pickle. We're not getting out of it anytime soon. Look at our regulatory system. But we have to do it for ourselves. We have to do it for our kids. So the more we take on this project individually, the more it's going to have a ripple effect to your family and to your friends. We know that these chemicals get absorbed. We can test every system in the body and figure out where they're coming from and where they're landing. So we want to get rid of them as much as we can by not letting them in, and then eating nutritionally to fight off the harm that potentially is there. I like to tell people, just let us not look back in anger or forward in fear, but around in awareness. This is about empowerment, folks. This is about really seeing that what our behaviors are and what we do with our behavior actually has value. And I can tell you, I do this in my practice, and I see this, that people make behavioral changes, they see benefits, real clinical benefits. So if you want to be a nerd, you can do the deep dive into the textbook on the left. Really great contributors, 26 of the world's leading contributors on food additives, on drinking water, on personal care products, everything. But really, the take-home good stuff is non-toxic, and really I want people to think about sharing that with family and friends, because really it's so useful in terms to what to do. Or you can take a look at a TED Talk if your kids are hard to convince, like my kids and their friends. This is often used in classrooms. And finally, my frustration led to a platform where I just share this information as much as I can. I don't sell anything. I don't endorse anything. That's why I don't talk about filter names. But I will tell you this is really good information, and it's all usable. So I really hope you enjoyed this talk, and I look forward to working with UCI on faculty. I'm really thrilled to get started and to create the environmental health and integrative rheumatology curriculum. So thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure.